All right, we're live. We're on Substack Live. This will be an episode of Stoic Conversations between Michael and I, where we are taking questions from readers or really anyone in the chat as well. If you have any questions about Stoicism, philosophy broadly, happy to take them. And we had a number of questions emailed in, some commented, and also, I suppose, over the past month or so, had some common threads of different kinds of questions people have asked us. So if we don't get too many questions in the live chat, we'll just be running through those. The first question we have is around sort of the nature of the unconscious and Stoicism. So do you want to kick us off with that, Michael?
Yeah, so this question was from a reader listener about what is the role of unconscious decisions in Stoicism, or do those exist? What do those look like? Um, it's a good question because I think starting with Plato, you have this framework of this animal part of your mind, or this maybe irrational part of your mind that it motivates you and pushes you in directions, and it's the job of the rational part of your mind to control that part. And then I think in Freud and modern psychology, you get this idea, at least in pop psychology, you get this idea of the subconscious, and that plays this really important role. You have these parts of yourself that you might not be aware of, these desires, these interests. Um, Stoicism doesn't really have this kind of picture of the irrational subconscious. I guess it really depends on what we mean by subconscious or unconscious decisions. um, you can do things, according to the Stoics, you can obviously do things without being consciously aware of them. You can obviously make decisions, form judgments without being consciously aware of them. That happens all the time. And that's one of the things that Stoicism is intentionally trying to stop. When we talk about mindfulness or prosoche, it's about being conscious of the decisions you're making, because the Stoics also view our beliefs as decisions in a way. We have experiences. The example I like to use: somebody bumps into you and you get angry. The Stoics are going to say that was a decision because you judged that person as insulting you, as harming you in some way, and you're fighting. You're now angry at them for harming you. You want to get revenge, something along these lines. So yeah, I guess that's the distinction I want to make: is we have lots of unconscious decisions in Stoicism, if we mean they are not things we are aware, decisions we are aware of making. And that's where a lot of our emotions will come from. That's where a lot of our passions will come from. And Stoic mindfulness is about making those judgments conscious, intentional, purposeful. That's a big part of the work. But what they don't have is they don't have this picture of the subconscious. They don't have this picture of there's some sort of irrational part of ourself that pushes us to do things, and then we have to use our reason or our intellect to fight against that. There's not really that conflict. That's one of my favorite parts of Stoicism, is that everything is reducible in Stoic behavior. I mean, you know this, Caleb, that everything is reducible to that idea of what do you believe? What are your judgments? What are your values? And so when we act in ways that maybe seem subconscious to us, or seem like to be motivated by the subconscious or animal part of ourselves, the Stoic is going to say, no, that's actually a value that you hold, or that's actually a belief that you have. And how is the way that you're feeling or the way that you're acting, how is that giving you information, or what is that telling you about the beliefs you do hold? What is that telling you about what you do value? Um, and so that's the way that I would think about it. No to, maybe you want to call that subconscious, but yes to unconscious decisions. And a big part of Stoicism is bringing those to the forefront.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, I should say thanks for joining all our handful of viewers. Feel free to drop a question in the chat and we'll take it on. But just continuing on this theme of the unconscious, I suppose, what you're saying, the idea is that we have decisions that we make that we're not aware of. You have this idea of reflection, you get an impression, and like the ideal philosopher, Stoic, reflects on their experience and then makes a decision about it. But there are so many cases in our lives where we sort of sleepwalk through life. And it's in that
Mhm.
sense where we don't reflect on our decisions, our judgments, the way we're thinking. In that sense, the Stoics agree that we are unconscious, and so in some real sense, and we're working to become more conscious, more reflective, and aware. But what they don't have is this idea that, oh, there's something that bubbles up from
Hmm.
our, the depths of our psyche that forces us to make some decision or to make some judgment. I think that's a critical part of their picture of the world, as you say. Like, even if it feels like there's something, even if you feel coerced in a value judgment or emotion, the Stoics say you're playing a role in that. Part of you is making a decision about it, even if you're uh, not actively aware of it in the moment, or even if you rather not believe that.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think sleepwalking is a nice metaphor because you're like participating. You're participating. It's not this other part of you. It's not this Jekyll and Hyde. You just might not be fully conscious, fully aware um, of your own thoughts or of your own values, of your own beliefs. Right?
Cool. Well, nice. Let's take another one. We have another question. Um, Perhaps somewhat related to this. It's really on what's possible with Stoicism. And it's, can I train my mind to a level of automaticity where I nearly always select the appropriate action? Um, Almost in a way that's automatic, and that generates, the right impulse from the impression.
Yeah, I think this is a really good one. There's this framework. I don't actually know whose framework it is. I should look it up. But framework my athletic coach used to talk a lot about in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, where you start with unconscious incompetence. You are bad at the sport and you don't even realize you're bad. Then you can become consciously incompetent. You know your mistakes. Then you become consciously competent. You know how to hit the baseball and you're doing it intentionally. And then at the highest level, there's that kind of unconscious competence where somebody pitches the ball and you just swing and you hit it and you're not even thinking about it. And so the Stoics are going to talk about ethics or morality like any other craft. They're going to say it's like sport, it's like playing an instrument, it's like any other skill that you develop. And so I think it follows that similar model where you begin. This was the sleepwalking. You begin with unconscious incompetence. You're getting angry and you don't even know why. You're feeling anxious and you're not even aware of why. Maybe you learn some stoicism and you go, oh, I'm getting anxious because I'm trying to control things that aren't up to me. Um, and then eventually you making the right judgments, you're acting in a stoic way, but you're doing it intentionally, it's taking effort. And then eventually you become unconsciously competent. And so um yes, the Stoics said that the sage or the perfect person or the morally excellent person would almost be automatically competent. So they actually said that you couldn't become once you became virtuous, you actually couldn't lose that virtue because the sage isn't even really like deliberating in the same way we do. They they understand themselves in relation to the universe, they understand what virtue is, they understand what it means to be a good person. And so when life pitches, to use that metaphor, life pitches an impression at them, that pitching a ball at them, they just swing and they hit it. And it's almost a reflective or automatic reaction, at least in most situations. And you can think of this as a person. I use that example at the start. Somebody bumps into you and you get angry. You know, the consciously competent stoic is the person that gets bumped into and goes, okay, was that did that was that a bad thing? Was I harmed? Was that something in my control? They kind of run through the list and they evaluate the impression. And you can imagine the stoic sage is the person who gets bumped into and they don't even have to deliberate. They just understand that being bumped into in a crowd isn't any kind of harm to them and they don't need to think about it more deeply. So I do think that kind of that automatic selection of the appropriate way to act or the appropriate way to feel. Yeah, it was a big part of Stoicism. Now, can you achieve that? This they famously said the sages were really uncommon as a phoenix once every 500 years. It's not an easy standard, but I really do like, Caleb, that athletic metaphor. Do you think, yeah, at the end of the day, we're trying to be the kind of people who respond to situations in a skillful way, like a musician playing a chord out of habit, like an athlete responding to a pitch. And so that is the target to aim for.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a aspiration. And I suppose if you take
Hmm.
the question at face value, can I become someone who always responds automatically with the right decision? The answer is probably not, just given the Stoic view about how rare the sage was, because that's really what the question is asking is, can I become a sage? And uh, yeah, it's simply a exceptionally difficult project. Perhaps some Stoics even doubted that it was possible. But that being said, and this is also why I like the athletic metaphor, it's true that you can become more like a sage and make better decisions, take the appropriate action in a wider range of circumstances throughout one's life. I think the Stoics certainly believe in the idea of progress, even if you
Hmm.
couldn't reach the ideal standard. Um, and I think something that grounds that in Stoicism, in the philosophy, is that if you can see other people making excellent decisions, taking the appropriate action, the exemplars are real, and there's fundamentally nothing that separates you from them. Like, of course, you have different talents, different personality, different environment, and such. But the Stoics were keen to emphasize that we are all,
Hmm.
we're all able to make decisions. We're rational animals, and because of that fact, uh, we can choose appropriate actions. There's nothing holding you back, as it were. So I think I suppose that's the optimistic side of the message. In addition to that aspiration to become a sage, where there is something admirable to shoot for that target, even if it's an exceptionally difficult one to reach.
Yeah, if stoicism's like a sport. It's not like basketball or something where there's like, some people are just gonna be 6'8" and they're just it's gonna be easy for them, and some people are gonna be shorter. We're all kind of equipped. Yeah, we're equipped with an ability. There's not a core fundamental difference between myself and Marcus Aurelius or Seneca or Epictetus in terms of the relevant quality. And the relevant quality is, as you said, we're rational beings. We're people who are able to reflect upon what we're thinking and feeling, and think carefully and make better decisions.
Yep, absolutely. Although, of course, you can't win every game in life. In a way, the Stoic says, everyone can win the game of life, as it were, even if they're not suited for, basketball, politics,
Yeah.
leadership, what have you. You are suited for other roles, and you can be excellent in them. And that just means making the right decision in them.
Hmm. Totally.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent part of Stoicism. One of my favorite aspects, I suppose. You want to take another question?
Yeah. So we got some questions. One here. Mm, I've kind of anonymized it a bit, but the question is, you can fill in this with what you want, but I've observed some sort of, there's some sort of incredible injustice in the world, and you can fill that in with what you want. Something, something terrible's happened. Somebody's suffering. It seems unnecessary. It seems terrible. Um, how am I supposed to stay calm about this? How am I supposed to um, not be upset about what seems, to add to the question, probably about some sort of instance of vice or suffering out in the world. Um, what is a stoic strategy for handling that?
Yeah, it's certainly a difficult question. And something that's funny about this question, I know we anonymize it a bit, is that we've had different varieties of these questions. Usually it has to do with politics, and we get them both from the left and the right. So in particular, we got emails asking how to respond to the assassination of Charlie Kirk, or perhaps people who are a little more right leaning. And we've also had email about how to respond to the recent uh, corruption from Trump or something of this nature. So on one hand, it's a difficult question on its face just as it stands, but of course, on the other, I think probably one does need to dive into the particulars of these specific situations. But taking it broadly and hedging, I think we could spend a whole really an exceptional amount of time on this question: how to manage anger, how to manage especially political matters, this matter of justice. I think something that's useful is a common way these questions are framed is, how do I stay calm about this? And I think the first distinction a Stoic might make is they do call on philosophers not to be full of passion, not to act out of what we might say of extreme emotion, not to be irrational. But at the same time, they're also that's consistent with being assertive, taking a stand. So, it's not just, of course, that the Stoics are asking for a calm tranquility that is not involved in politics. Many Stoics were exceptionally involved in politics, from resisting emperors to becoming emperors, of course. So, with that said, I think Marcus Aurelius, his notes on how to address anger in Meditations, I believe it's 11:18, are exceptionally useful. Of course, there's Seneca, his work on anger, where he has a number of different strategies for attacking anger. I think personally, I find the Marcus Aurelius' sort of stance on taking a wider perspective, thinking about the span of time, the political regimes that have come and gone, the reality of the mortal nature of everything, to be useful. Seneca has this funny line about, that man who you're so angry with, how can you wish anything worse upon him than death? And that's going to happen regardless of what you do. So I think there's something to that style of thought. And perhaps it's also, taking that broader perspective is also useful when you think about, what's the correct judgment of these events to begin with? How do you, in fact, deal with assassination, free speech, corruption, and such? I think sometimes when people think about these issues, it can help both from sort of emotional standpoint, being rational, of course, but also looking at other instances in history can, I think, inform one's judgment, as it were, about what justice actually looks like in these cases.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me, because I generally think the issue, it's almost like splitting into two different issues. On one hand, you have trivial things that you're blowing out of proportion. And so it's like, I'm getting really anxious in traffic. I really care about what people are saying about me. And then there's this separate question of, things that are just non-trivial, these very substantial moments. And I think you hit the nail on the head, is like, one of the only way to deal for me with those bigger moments is to expand your conception of the world. I think if you try to go purely to the dichotomy of control, it can almost be unsatisfying in that moment of, well, this isn't up to me, or I don't control it. That, to me, I think is a bit more of a useful tool to smaller personal injustices or smaller moments of conflict. For those larger moments of, like, the way the world is right now, or it feels like the world is on fire, it feels like there is a crisis. In some cases there might be. Global warming is another example people have asked us about before. um yeah, I think, just summarizing what you're saying, expanding that conception of time is helpful. Understanding that things like this have happened before, will happen again, and that part of your role as a human is to understand how to maneuver them, and understand, as you said, how to participate in them in a healthy way. And so to be politically active, or to stand up for the things that you believe in, but in a healthy way and in a sustainable way. Um, and so I use a lot of Marx's tools of the view from above, or expanding my conception of time over a larger period of time. Um, I think back about things that have happened in the past, and how, the way that they've unfolded has sometimes been unclear. And then, or not, people might have thought that it was going to go one way and it went another, and there's that kind of ambiguity that you can only look at in hindsight. I find that kind of idea reassuring as well. I think that's basically just adding on to what you're saying, that I think you have to expand perception in that moment, because if you get too focused on um, the particular situation, it can be it's ineffective, and can yeah, lead to the kind of anxiety we're talking about.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's also the idea of surprise that I find useful. One way to frame the Stoic project is to reduce the number of times you are surprised by really internalizing true beliefs, essentially pursuing knowledge. So, of course, there's a famous line from Marcus Aurelius, not be surprised when a fruit tree produces figs, and likewise, you shouldn't be surprised when men are vicious. I think that's just a reality of life, of course. In a certain sense, if you're angry about corruption, didn't you already believe that people were corrupt, the political systems were corrupt? What exactly surprises you about this state of affairs? I think that question can be useful because sometimes, of course, you are learning something about the world. You made an assumption about something that turns out to be false, about specific people that turn out to be false. But at other times, I think common outrages really are things that you should expect, whether you're on the right or the left. It's part of your worldview, and then there's that question. Okay, what role then is anger, especially when it becomes a property of crowds as opposed to the individual? What role is that actually playing?
Yeah, great points. Great points. Not a beginner. If you could study Stoicism for a little bit and it could remove your anxiety about, major world events, then that would be would be lovely. It's not a beginner technique, I would say. But agree with your point about if you already think this, if you already know this, if you already think that there are flawed people in the world, if you already think there are flawed people in positions of power or people that do terrible things, why is there that degree of surprise? And shouldn't that already be kind of incorporated, or shouldn't that be built in to the model, so to speak, so that there's not that surprise or that shock when it happens.
Yeah, and I
Um,
find I find just adding on that, I find personally that I become more angry often for smaller outrages as opposed to
mm,
events of truly significant scale. And I think it's because I assume that, of course, there are structural problems in the world, but at least, these few freedoms should be treated as sacred and
mhm.
never violated, even if they're relatively small in the scheme of things, or at least, these sorts of bureaucracy should be competent in this way. And then when they're not, then that's almost harder to deal with than, the brute realities of war, uh, or existential risks, catastrophic risks, what have you.
Yeah, so it's
And
the
I,
same kind
I
of
think that's a flaw,
exercise.
just to be clear.
You think, yeah, that's a mistake on your end, but I mean, it's the same kind of mistake, right? Is it's
Mhm.
like it's the same exercise before, is what are those beliefs that are subconscious, and when you're experiencing that shock or emotion, what belief is being challenged. And for you, maybe it's a bit more, you're a bit more either realist or cynical about the large scale things, and then a bit more unrealistically, I don't know, maybe optimistic or ignorant about the small things, and then it's
Mhm.
surprising to you again.
Yep.
um Anything else on that one that you wanted to say?
No, there's this related one. You want to take that one on next?
um I mean, this is another difficult one. I personally find these ones quite hard. Is how can Stoicism help deal with political anger and the divisions between people? What do you think, Caleb?
Yeah, so we've said a little bit about political anger. I suppose if you think about divisions between people, that's something we could speak to a little more. Again, I think Marcus Aurelius is useful here. There's Meditations 2.1, which is really the framework for how he approached anger, expecting other people to be vicious, at the same time reminding himself that what it is to live a good life, to be a good emperor, is to work with other people, live well with them, and remember that at the end of the day, you're fundamentally all human,
Hmm.
and that means treating them with justice and respect. And I think that idea, especially of respect, I had a conversation with Alexandra Hudson not so long ago, who's promoting this idea of civility in political engagements, and she sort of sees civility as, maybe perhaps my framing, not hers, but sees civility as the middle way between politeness that completely avoids unnecessary conflict versus conflict prone politics where you're in it to win on your side, perhaps no matter the cost. Whereas civility is the ability to see other people with respect, but at the same time have difficult conversations, take a stand, be assertive, fight for justice. Um, and I think that's a useful idea, useful target for dealing with other people. Is what does civility look like? How can you find, as it were, the balance between assertiveness, willingness to fight over what's worth fighting for without being drawn into useless conflict.
Well, I think part of civility comes back to that line from Marcus Aurelius you were referencing, 2.1, which is this idea of, and paraphrasing, but it's something along the lines of, remember that we're connected, you're connected with this person, that you're both humans, that you're meant to be cooperating. And so I think you have to find, or the Stoic argument is you have to find some sort of common ground with this person, some sort of shared goal or shared good. And for the Stoics, that's easy because they were cosmopolitans, right? Our fundamental ideas as people trying to live, trying to navigate the confusing experience of being alive. And so we share that. It's not left against right. It's not my country against your country. It's like the most important overriding identity is that of people. And so when you confront somebody as another person, then that's the grounds by which to have the civility that you talked about. The other thing that helps me in these kinds of conversations is that Stoic idea of um, you people um, you're both just trying to pursue the good as you view it, right? Everybody is just trying to live out the best life as they understand it. And now that's not a relativistic claim. Stoics are going to say some people are wrong. Some people think things that aren't true, and some people think that things are okay that aren't are okay are not okay, and some people think that things are wrong that should be allowed and should be fine. So there's still a grounds to have a debate, but when I'm confronting another human, maybe if they're coming antagonistically, maybe it's just like I don't want to have this conversation. It's not a productive conversation. But if they're willing to have that conversation civilly, then you should also be willing to have that conversation civilly because you're just two people who are saying once you get past the disagreement or the emotional shock of the disagreement, you're just somebody expressing your worldview. And you're I think both people on the left or the right are pursuing, their conception of the good life or their conception of what they think is good for society. And so having the argument on that grounds, I've found has been much more constructive. And that was something I learned through philosophy. I learned through taking logic courses and through studying Stoicism. This is Epictetus's idea has this idea of preconceptions that everybody wants what is good, but they just call good different things. Everybody wants what's just, they just call just different things. And so when you talk to a person, you go, okay, you think this is unjust. We both agree we don't want unjust things to happen. But why do you think it's unjust? What is that? What are your values that make this unjust? And I think you can have that conversation, go back to that term of civility pretty civilly. And that's a way to understand and engage with other people that I've found effective. That's something I try to always do is just like, I'm going to first try to understand you as well as possible. And do that because um, you're just trying to pursue your conception of the good life. We might disagree and you might be wrong. I might be wrong, but at least we can have a conversation on that grounds.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think sometimes in these kinds of conversations, people will say things like, we're so different, we can't live together.
Mm.
Can't live with these people, the right or the left, whoever it is. And I think it's worth putting a question mark whether that's really true in many cases, of course. And in reality, you do in fact live with these people, or perhaps you've chosen a state where you don't get to encounter them. But I think that's often, in most cases, certainly something one should be skeptical about. And even if it is the case that you imagine the case of full blown conflict that is warranted sometimes, but the Stoic position, I think the position of many other philosophies is that you still don't lose your head in those positions. You sort of see the situation almost as tragic, right? You have different
Hmm.
visions of the good, and that necessitates a conflict in order to realize justice, whatever that may be. It's not a kind of revelry or politics that feels good in a way. Perhaps I think there's a kind of politics where it becomes either a sanctimonious righteousness that you might see, or on once perhaps you see that a little bit more commonly on the left, whereas perhaps on the right these days there's almost a kind of cruelty, anger of victory, or something of this sort. That both of those feel good in a way that perhaps one should be suspicious of. I think there's conflict is warranted. I don't want to have the view that you can have a dialogue with anyone, find common ground with anyone. I think that's far too optimistic and somewhat unrealistic. But at the same time, when you get into these positions of conflict, when you're truly advocating for a different cause, different position, there's a kind of tragedy in that. It's not. I think one should be wary of these kind of political emotions that make it feel like you're the protagonist of a movie slaying the all the dragons and such.
Yeah, the slang about you don't want to feel like you're dunking on people or something. I don't want to feel like oh, this is any sort of joy like that. I I I think about this, and now if I go back to this question one more time from a kind of Stoic point of view, there's just that common sense to Stoicism of people have always disagreed. People have always, based on their upbringing or their background, had different political alignments, held different positions. Um, And, do you want to go through life feeling alienated from other people, being like, I can only engage with people who align? Or do we want to, is there a way to have these conversations civilly? And it seems like, yes, if you are willing to state your position and engage with their position, there's not this big surprise that there's disagreement. That's not some sort of
Mhm.
like new, new situation. And I think that's important to keep in mind as well. It's part of the human experience, and you should figure out a way to handle those conversations as well as possible. Um, Anything else to add on that one before we jump to one more?
No, I think that's it. Feel free to leave a question on that thread or any other questions if you're watching. But let's take on some of the others.
So one question, we'll get a little more technical. So we'll go from politics to Stoic psychology. Um, One question was, if I had the short version of it is, um, well, maybe I'll just read it out here. The question is, I'm confused though about the prohieresis. And the prohieresis, that's Epictetus's idea of the part of ourselves that makes decisions, that reflects upon impressions. This person says, it seems like it's Stoic doctrine, after Epictetus, that our prohieresis or faculty of choice is the only thing in our power. That seems to be the Stoic position. But in Discourses 1.28, Epictetus seems to say that we cannot control what we assent to because we can only assent to what we believe is true. So do we have power over our prohieresis or not? I think it's a great question. And it's a common point of confusion. And so the basic question is, Epictetus says our faculty of choice is up to us. Epictetus also says that we have to assent to what seems true to us. If I look outside and there's sunlight, I have to believe it's day. So how do I reconcile those two things? And the typical answer to that is it comes down to, I think, to a misunderstanding of control. So when Epictetus says that our faculty of choice is we control it, the translation I prefer is that the faculty of choice is up to us, which means that it's not determined by other things. My body is determined by other things because somebody can, as Epictetus says, you can chain my leg, you can throw me in jail, but not even Zeus, not even God can determine, control what I choose. So that is up to me. But what it means for something to be up to you does not mean it like exists distinct from your current beliefs, from your emotions, from your history. So it's up to you in terms of you're making these choices. You're responsible for these choices, but it's not up to you in terms of I can choose in a vacuum. I could look outside and I could believe it's nighttime even though it's light outside. Um, or I could choose to, snap my fingers and believe I'm 8 foot tall or something like this. We don't have these kinds of powers. Um, any more than I can read and this is also this idea. I can't read Stoicism once and decide, oh, okay, I've now chosen that virtue is the only good and I'm a sage now. Um, the way we choose things is we make decisions based on evidence and based on our reflection on the evidence, and we weigh up the evidence against our current set of beliefs. Um, I hope Caleb, did I explain that well? But it's idea of when Epictetus says that our faculty of choice is up to us, which is true. And then, so then how can something up to us not be free? But it is because it's constrained by itself. It is, you can only choose based on what you know and based on what you believe. You can't just, because you'd be anything. Because if you were anything, you'd be nothing, right? Doesn't, when you think through it logically, we have to make choices based on what we think and we believe already. And that's why it's so important in Stoicism to do this work to make small changes to what we believe. Because if I make a small change to what I believe, it has all these positive side effects down the road. If I change the way I think about my political enemies, for example, if I change the way I think about the value of money or appearance or fame or something like this, if I genuinely change that belief, it's going to make all these kinds of moments of behavior or character a lot easier because it's going to be a lot easier to act in the right way. So that's why it's important to change our beliefs because it determines how we choose and how we act. Um, so yeah, that's how I would answer that. What do you think, Caleb?
Yeah, I think that's well put. It's somewhat connected to the earlier question we had about making the right decisions
Mhm.
automatically, and perhaps somewhat paradoxically, it's almost as if as you become better, you can't make the same mistakes you could have years ago. Sometimes people will talk about, exceptional athletes or exceptional artists, and they'll say things like, "Oh, he can't actually make the wrong move here. He's just so ingrained, that out of hours and hours of drilling, he's going to do the right thing every time." Or, this artist is going to make this excellent decision, this aesthetic decision every time. She can't make something ugly, even if she tried. And in a way, that's what you're shooting for. Somewhat paradoxically, it's in the moment where you're attempting progress, where now you need to make a decision between the right actions and wrong ones, and then it's up to you about how you make that. Up to you how you make that decision. You've got more freedom there, perhaps in a sense, but it's not the freedom Stoics ultimately care about, which is a really related point here. It's not uh, freely pursuing the good in a way that emerges from you. It's the ability to enslave yourself to externals or act
Mhm.
ignorantly or what have you. So I hope that gets at the thrust of that question. But I think that's some related points that I think the Stoics make well.
Yeah, I think so. Like because maybe another way to take it is that idea of freedom, right? When the Stoics talk about what does it mean to be free then if I'm determined by my beliefs or I can't choose other than what I already think or something along these lines. I think there's two things. One is you can create a type of freedom for yourself by deliberating and being conscious. This goes back to that previous conversation as you said. When I'm sleepwalking through life, I really am just like an input output machine. I receive an experience and I output an emotion. Somebody says something to me and I output a reaction or a response. Even though I, have beliefs 1 through 10 or my character is the way it is, I can exert some sort of control over that situation by pausing, reflecting, slowing things down. It's basically thinking there's a little bit of movement. Going back to the athlete analogy, which is so helpful, or the painting analogy. Um, the painter can paint something really quickly and poorly, or they can paint something slower. Just because they went slower doesn't mean they can become a Picasso, but they can reach maybe like the ceiling of their potential by slowing down and doing things intentionally. And the Stoics are basically saying that is you've got a little range for your beliefs or range for how you act. And if you go slowly and you go intentionally, you can hit the higher part of that range. And you want to do that because when life comes at you fast and hard, you're going to kind of fall to your floor. So you want to kind of get your floor as high as possible and build that skill slowly, intentionally over time. Again, just like a sport or an art. That's one point about you. You do have that freedom by being slow and intentional. Another point of freedom that Epictetus talks about is it's not that I'm free to be whoever I want or to believe whatever I want. Epictetus very famously, he makes fun of the skeptics who's like, "Oh, you say you don't believe things, but if I throw this pot at your head, you're going to duck," right? Like there's certain things we just kind of have to believe to be true. But when Epictetus talks about freedom, it's that I can't be coerced by others. So if I'm the kind of person that believes that the quality of my life depends on, what these people think of me, it depends on me getting this promotion at work and the prestige that comes with that title. It depends on anything that's external to me. Then other people can control me because they can threaten me with taking away the thing I want, or they can bribe me by offering me the thing I want. And so my behavior is now controlled by people external to me. Whereas if I desire to be a good person, then nobody can threaten me or bribe me. They can't threaten me to make me a bad person. They can't bribe me to make me a good person. That's just something I do. And so the way that I act is always generated by me. I pick how to act. Nobody forces me to act a certain way. And so that's the kind of freedom that the Stoics are interested in. Not freedom like, oh, I can believe whatever I want, which again, I think when you think about it, is probably not as important to you as you might think it is, or might see. It's not that big of a freedom to give up, I guess is what I would say.
Right. Cool. We had another question related to this. Can humans skip assent and go straight from impression to impulse?
Yeah, I'm happy to. We're talking about again about the psychology according to the Stoics. So, the Stoics say that humans have this capacity to assent, which means that when we experience things, we don't have to make experiences beliefs. They have to go through this thing called assent, which is where I have to say, okay, that's actually a true thing that's happening to me. Um, I don't know. You think of this like if you're watching a movie, you're viewing all these kinds of things, but you're not assenting to any of them as true, or you're assenting to them as a movie, and so you're not actually thinking these are real things happening. You're saying, well, that's just a movie. Likewise, if somebody bumps into me, I might receive the impression, oh, I've been harmed. This person's assaulted me or insulted me, and I don't have to assent to that as true. And so the question here is, can you skip this? Can you skip this step? Because this is what the Stoics say animals do. Animals don't have assent because they're not intelligent enough. They don't. They're not rational animals. So they're that input output again. The issue with this is, so I guess to be technical here, what the Stoics would say is that no, you're always assenting. Something can't become a belief unless you assent to it as true. But it goes back to the beginning of our conversation. You can assent incredibly carelessly. You can assent almost without noticing, and we do it all the time. When we're walking down the street or we're moving around, we're always assenting to things not intentionally or carefully. So we can do this, but that is just us not doing it consciously. That's a really important point because the fact that we assent to everything is it's the Stoics' way of blocking people controlling us, right? There's this idea that the people can't make you believe anything, and that comes back to this point because you always have that safeguard of assent. If that wasn't true, then somebody could make you believe something. They could force it on you. And the Stoic idea is like, no, you always have this ability. You're just kind of doing it carelessly or non-reflectively. So Epictetus would say we can act like animals, but we are not animals, non-rational animals.
Yeah, there's the additional technical detail that perhaps some experiences might force a reaction out of you, but they don't thereby create a belief and shape your character. So there are some cases where it's almost like the mental equivalent of the doctor tapping you on the knee and you reflexively kick out your knee. There might be some cases where you get a jump scare or something of this sort. Mentally, you're going to shift. And you can't not do that. But that's different from creating a belief that then is sort of internalized as your character and such.
Yeah, the Stoic example is we're going to flinch at thunder or lightning, but that is just a physical response. It's not. We haven't formed this belief that our life's in danger, and I need to be really afraid of this lightning storm or something. That's still a choice we get to make.
Absolutely. Cool. Well, I think we leafed through all our questions. We got anything else we want to touch on?
No, that's it. Thanks, Kel. It was a lot of fun.
Cool. That's fun.
And thanks everyone for joining. We'll keep these going, do some more of these as we go. So any other questions, let us know. And thanks to everyone who sent us in questions either for this or in the past. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. If you have any specific topics or other guests you'd like to have us on, or have us put on rather, Stoic Conversations, we'll happily do it or attempt to at any rate. So do let us know. And thanks for joining all.
Okay.
Cool. Bye, Michael.
Bye.
Bye, all.